All right, the recording has started, and this is the Crossplane community meeting for July 15th, 2021. Feel free to add yourself to the attendees list in the agenda doc, or Dan or Steve or somebody can continue adding folks there as well too if they want. I'll drop a link here in the Zoom chat to the agenda doc so people can follow along at home as well too. So we are early in the 1.4 release cycle. I think the last community meeting we had just released 1.3 like the day before. So we're still fairly early in the 1.4 cycle, and things are starting to get picked up and move along there. I think there's some things that are already in progress, but I think there's still some definite time because the release isn't until the end of August. There's definite time for features to get picked up, priority to get set as well too for things that are in high demand. So let's talk about, let's bring up the board and let's talk about what is on the board right now. And I'm going to go ahead and move this link up to the top so it's easier to find next time. Okay, so Muafik he's out for an entire month, but I think he comes back maybe not next week, but the week after. So all the stuff that Muaf had in progress, like the cross-resource reference design document, that's all been in a bit of a holding pattern for him to return and rejoin the community. So Dan, do you kind of want to chime in about some of the things you've been focusing on and some of the work that you're progressing on and think that you'll be pulling in for 1.4?
Yeah, so there's a couple issues in the proposed that I think all of them are important, but they have kind of different levels of urgency. I think that the ones around providing like alternative credentials and as well as custom certificate authorities for pulling packages and stuff like that would be good to have, but they're not super important. But I'd like to get some folks who are doing this to weigh in on those. Um, so so if that's applicable to anyone on this call or anyone watching this later, please comment on that issue. um, and outside of that, I did put the provider config partitioning one a little later down in the agenda, but I can go ahead and talk about that if we want now, or defer that.
Yeah, that sounds good, Dan. As we're talking about 1.4 potential items, yeah, let's go ahead and put that on the table now.
Okay, cool. So this is mostly motivated out of folks hitting issues with, wanting to provide credentials via something like IRSA or workload identity, but you only have a single pod for your provider, and then the other motivation is sharding around, performance-related things. So how often you're hitting the API, how often you are detecting drift, and that sort of thing. So the proposal here is, since we control the installation of all providers, right? They go through the Crossplane package manager. We can kind of add in bits as we want to allow you to, have that provider config respond in various manners, or have that provider, sorry, respond in different manners. Something that every managed resource has in common is a reference or a defaulted reference to a provider config. And provider configs are also the way that you specify, how you want to acquire credentials to authenticate to the external API, as well as any other configuration. It's kind of like an arbitrary, set of configuration that's applicable to that provider. So that being said, that makes a lot of sense to divide on those, right? Both from a perspective of, you can specify which managed resource is going to be reconciled, or which, if you were to split them, how a managed resource would be reconciled by the provider configure references, and also, how your credentials are going to be specified. So in this proposal, basically saying that if you opt into this functionality, the provider config for a provider, the provider config type it supplies, would be a unit of partitioning, which would essentially mean that when you install a provider, we start up a separate controller in core Crossplane that watches for provider configs of that type and creates a separate deployment for each of the provider configs that exist, which means that, and we could add some things around there. If you said like these two provider configs should be paired together, we could do labels or something like that. But what that essentially gives you the ability to do is, specify using workload identity or IRSA or even just normal credentials for different pods for each provider config. And it also means that you could have, a set of resources that got checked for drift every day and a set that got checked every minute, right? You could configure each of those sets of controllers based on the provider config that was in usage, which is useful for like separating environments and separating different kind of types of critical infrastructure. So this proposal is I think it has enough for it to actually communicate what the idea is here, as well as like the technical aspects of it. But it would be really great for folks to weigh in here and say, hey, I really need this kind of support. So basically giving use cases so we can make sure that all of those would be addressed by what's proposed here, just as kind of like a reference to what could be an alternative. Something like having different controllers for each resource type, or different deployments for each resource type, and having a separate pod for every type of controller could be something different that wouldn't be addressed here. From what I've heard, this is more in line with what folks are looking for. But like I said, would love for people to weigh in on that or reach out to me.
Yeah, that's great, Dan. And I think for my instincts here as well too is that I think you have a pretty good like idea of how this might be used, especially from your interactions with folks in the community as well too, and hearing some of the concerns or issues they run into, maybe like rate limiting as well too. So I think you've got a pretty good pulse on it. But yeah, it's always useful to have have folks weigh in with like their use case or something that they think is important to address with this type of implementation.
For sure.
That's it's very useful. Dan, anything else that you wanted to bring up for 1.4?
No, I think the rest of them are pretty straightforward. Like using backoff, we've talked about that before. And so if once again, if folks have desire for those to be brought in, definitely show support on the issues.
Awesome. Nick, I think Nick, no, he's not here, but so Nick started this week. I think there's a design for it now as well too, for composition revisions, which is I think quite an important feature for the ongoing usage of compositions and iterating on them, and adding new versions and updating them, etc. So did Nick open a PR design for this, or?
Yep, there's a one pager open. It's linked in the doc a little bit lower down.
In wait, further down. Oh, in the doc.
Yeah. I put it in there and put his name on it, optimistically
there we go.
that he would be here to talk about it. We got to that point, but I don't think he's here quite yet.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, so Nick did open up the one-pager design doc for composition revisions. I think this is a fairly important feature here, and having this land in 1.4, I think that would be quite interesting. I think there's a number of concerns that Nick's bringing up here around how to do this in a backwards compatible way and not change functionality or introduce a alpha level implementation to something that's a V1 API right now. So I think there's some things to kind of dance around there or figure out. But yes, Nick just opened this yesterday, and I think this is a pretty big investment, a pretty interesting feature for 1.4, along with the other things that Dan's doing, and then cross-rate resource references as well that Moaf had started. Yeah, so that's there for folks to weigh in on as well too. Diego, I know that you put in a vote for pluggable secret stores, which is issue 2366, and that is on the 1.4 board. Where did that go? I think that was in the proposed column. Am I blind? Oh, there it is. Okay, awesome. And Diego, is there anything about your use case or need for this that is, diverges or is different from kind of the way that this issue has been describing the problem so far? Anything different for you?
No, I think that the suggestion is pretty much good, and the use case is common between our usage of Crossplane, because if we could put these secrets in a proper secret manager, it would be great. Because as you know, you can base 64 secrets, you can easily access these secrets. So if you can put them in a separate and proper secret manager, it would be great.
Yep, definitely. That's great, Diego. Thanks for adding a vote for this as well too. And if there's anything that comes up in terms of your use case or ways that you'd like to see this go, definitely feel free to make a comment on here and kind of weigh in on it there as well too.
Okay.
Yeah, we have it. So we have it in the 1.4 proposed column right now. I don't know, like in terms of resources or who might be able to pick this up any like soon in the next few weeks, let's say. I don't know about that right now, but it's we put it in the proposed column here, and it's near the top of the list there. If anybody is interested in working on that, I don't think there's an assigned owner for it right now. I think there's some design chat in the issue there, but I don't think there's been any design doc or PR open for this already. So that is open for somebody from the community wants to take this on and contribute this feature, then that's certainly something that's available. I think that was the areas here that folks had mentioned for things that are being worked on 1.4 and desired features beyond everything else that was in the proposed column that has had some demand from the community. Is anything else that people want to bring up for 1.4 or make a case for an issue that's important to you or anything like that? All right, cool. Then I think we can leave 1.4 and move on to the community topics section. So the first topic in here, I was going through some of the recent live streams and videos and tutorials, etc. Around Crossplane, and so I was pretty amazed at how many there are in the last 2 weeks. So all these links here are new links. This is all content that's been created, since the last community meeting. Victor Farsik joined the team here to do developer advocacy for Crossplane. So we now have someone focusing in that role and creating, generating content, explaining things, making awesome videos. So I think a lot of these links are quite high quality as well now too. There's some new ones around like shifting left infrastructure management using Crossplane and how to combine the Crossplane with Argo CD and kubevela with our collaboration and on the open application model with Alibaba, Microsoft, and others. There's also a couple other ones that Bassam, one of the creators of the Crossplane project, went on the CNCF spotlights and talked about the Crossplane project and stuff there. So that is available on the CNCF's Twitch stream right now if you wanted to catch up on that one as well too. Quick question to the community here is that I've noticed that Twitch has, I think maybe it's like a 60-day retention policy, and then videos seem to be poof, gone. Is there, it's like for videos under our control, for like that we produce the content, we can just upload it to like our YouTube, Crossplane YouTube or something like that. But is there anything anybody has a good recommendation on for how to save videos for Twitch that are like on the CNCF channel?
I think you might be able to download them in some form or fashion, but I'm not sure. Maybe the CNCF could give us copies. I don't know.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm not super familiar with Twitch, so I didn't know if there's like just something obvious to be like, hey, click this here and it pins it saves the video or doesn't garbage collect it. But seems like that's kind of just part of the platform to just delete things that are, more than 2 months old. But yeah, that would be a good one not to lose though, because I think it was a really interesting interview with Pop and Bassam. So I would love to have that be persisted so we can keep that as a resource. I think this one's a particularly interesting one as well too. So Victor did for his onboarding and getting introduced deeper to the Crossplane project, met with Dan and did like they live streamed basically his first day on the project and getting onboarded. So I think that's, especially people that are kind of new to Crossplane, that was really interesting, kind of a cool concept to live stream the onboarding and education getting into the project. So I think that one was super interesting as well too. And then Nick wrote a provider Terraform recently. We've got provider Helm, provider SQL, provider GitHub, GitLab, there's provider Terraform as well too now. And Nick did a live stream with Victor on that topic as well too. DeLorean, that might be of interest to you as well too, considering your great talk that you did with Nick at the community day on Terraform and Crossplane. So that may be something of interest to you as well too, if you want to check out that video and see the work that Nick has done on provider Terraform.
Yeah, my ears perked up. I was like, ooh.
Awesome. Yeah, cool. So there's tons of interesting content and videos and stuff that are being watched or being produced here. So I've got links to them all in the agenda documents, and we tend to tweet about them as well too. So on like the Crossplane_IO Twitter account, you can see links to all this stuff as well too. So keep up the great work there, Dan and Victor and Nick and everybody. That's really cool to see all that awesome content. Awesome. And so a positive update on the incubation proposal with the CNCF. So the TOC, the Technical Oversight Committee, said they wanted to open up the public comment period, like I've been talking about for a few meetings here. Something that we found out was missing though, which was it just kind of glossed over, I suppose, was the technical advisory group. So for app delivery, they had not added the recommendation for the project to be approved for incubation. So they did that yesterday. And so they've added their formal recommendation of, so app delivery has formally endorsed or states that the Crossplane project fulfills the criteria to be an incubation project. So this is brand new, I think in the last like 8 hours, 12 hours or so. And this is the thing that the TOC was requesting to have in place before they could then go ahead and open up the public comment period. So I would imagine then that today, I lost my place. I would imagine that today, our sponsors, Harry and Ricardo, on the Technical Oversight Committee can then now go and open up the public comment period and move to a vote after the public comment period of 2 weeks is over. So that's a very good update to have, and I think that things are in place now. No big updates on the conformance program. I think there's a number of results for conformance that have been opened from basically all the major providers. That's not new news, but once we are approved for incubation, then we think that we can kind of move forward with getting the conformance and certification program approved and finalized as well too. So that's kind of on the back burner or on hold a little bit until the incubation is done. So this is a new section for the community agenda that I've added this week. I know that in Slack and GitHub issues, there's a lot of interesting conversations that happen that maybe they're troubleshooting an issue, maybe it's a feature request, but there's a lot of activity and the community is really engaged and a lot of discussions and things like that. So I added this new section here this week. And I think we'll keep it on the agenda going forward as well too, of just interesting conversations or things that may be relevant or kind of interesting for other folks to kind of tune in on. I'm going to start with the second two first to kind of address those. So Aaron, who is here, awesome. Hi, Aaron. Aaron addressed a problem with our GKE provider, or sorry, our GCP provider that has been kind of looming and becoming a much bigger issue for us recently. Like I think it was 1.19 of GKE, GCP basically removed basic auth So when you create a cluster and you get it's the user for it gets a username and password, and then we use that to, like with provider Helm, let's say, to deploy resources to it. That's not supported anymore in 1.19 and above. And then GKE's minimum supported version, I think, is now like 118. So it's basically we're coming up on the version where GKE would no longer support the authentication methods that Crossplane enables by default to be able to access the cluster. So this is quite a looming problem, and Aaron just hopped in this week as part of a hack week to solve that problem. Aaron, is there anything kind of interesting or that you would want to share about this this implementation, or things that it solves that I missed there?
Yeah, this is a pretty simple. Basically, what we're doing is we're implementing our own auth provider inside of provider Helm, and which I've learned we can do. And it's something that I think is actually in our best interest, because there is also a note in the GCP auth provider that they're going to start deprecating that current flow as well, starting in 1.22, and by 1.25 they're expecting to have it completely retired, and they're basically saying fall back to OIDC as a provider, and they don't really want to have these custom ones. So starting to implement our own custom tooling. The only reason we need this is because the standard GCP provider assumes that you are authenticating from an environment where you have kind of a functional G-Cloud binary, and that it can call out to the G-Cloud binary to do the first part of the token request. We've just removed a lot of that logic and allowed the ability to pass in credentials to the provider directly, so that it can do the complete token challenge and response and get you authenticated to the cluster. And it's handled by the by provider Helm at this point, although we could probably introduce something in provider GCP if we decide this is where we're going, where it can continuously refresh the tokens in the kubeconfig, and Helm can just rely on the kubeconfig natively.
Yeah, that sounds like a potentially good direction to take this further, Aaron. But either way, I think this is really nice this is something that's kind of in the back of my mind, like, oh man, people are gonna be kind of bitten by this in the somewhat near future, and it's gotten closer and closer to when that's gonna happen. So super grateful that you kind of hopped on that and identified that was an issue for the community, and you stepped in to provide a fix, man. That's really, really cool. Cool background too, by the way.
It was surprisingly fun.
Auth for GKE was surprising to be fun. I thought that would just be like everybody wants to do that all day long. All right. Now the another kind of thing to call out here that's also a product of a hack week that we've been running this week is a new provider for provider Kubernetes. I think hopefully there's a README in here that kind of talks about. There we go. Yeah, let's just view this file real quick. So Hassan, who is not here, he's out of town now on vacation for the next week or so. Hassan wrote a new provider as part of our hack week here that is, you can kind of think of it as similar to provider Helm, where you can create Crossplane objects and then provider Helm that represent Helm charts, and provider Helm will reconcile those and deploy those Helm charts. So you're kind of standardizing still on everything being a Kubernetes resource, a Crossplane resource that follows the Crossplane resource model, and it can be included in compositions and things like that as well too. But doing that for just vanilla standard Kubernetes objects as well too. So this kind of takes the idea that we've seen with provider Helm and then makes it more general to all Kubernetes objects. I think there is, I think I probably lost the link for it, but there is an example here that Hassan provided as well too, where you can make a composition, let's say, that deploys the Argo CD objects as well too, like an Argo application. So any Kubernetes object now, you could deploy those and provision and manage those, et cetera, and include them in compositions using provider Kubernetes now. So I think it's probably opens up a lot of really interesting use cases. This is in the Crossplane contrib organization, so it's an experimental kind of very early days provider here. It's not mature. It's just getting bootstrapped and started here. But I think it's pretty interesting kind of idea, and opens up some, more interesting avenues of doing, arbitrary objects, let's say. It kind of speaks to the interesting part of, if it has an API, you can write a provider for it, right? So there's all sorts of things that you kind of bring into management of the control plane, and integrate with as well too. So this is really cool to see this. And then another issue that I've had in this list here, because I think it was maybe potentially interesting, is somebody in the community here. I don't think they're on the call, but somebody in the community here was kind of talking about a scenario where they're creating VPCs using Crossplane. They're creating VPCs, subnets, route tables, all sorts of network-related objects using the provider AWS. And then it's not quite clear, but there seem to be maybe some circumstances where those objects are created, but there's not really any references to them. So they kind of potentially could leak or get lost there. So I was digging into this yesterday, and I just think I thought it was kind of interesting where, there could be a scenario here, but it's not very clear what it is. So I was wondering if anybody else had looked at this or was thinking about it a little bit more too, of objects getting created and not losing a reference to them, or not showing up under Crossplane's set of resources, managed resources that it is aware of, but still having been created in AWS. So I was kind of curious about what next steps on this might be, or any other thoughts. Dan, I know you were looking at it too.
Yeah, it's very hard to tell exactly what's going on here. But my guess is the cleanup process is resulting in this. I don't want to say it's not a bug in Crossplane, because it certainly could be. However, the kind of like iterative delete of all types of resources is not really how cleanup is supposed to work. So what I'm guessing is happening here is that managed resources are getting deleted, and composition is recreating those managed resources, and then the composition is getting cleaned up. So that's how there's getting like duplicate, of resources and that sort of thing. Because deleting managed resources that are managed under composition is not going to be a fun time, right? Because it's going to say, oh, it's missing now, I need to recreate it. So that's what I'm guessing is happening here. That being said, I think that to really get a full picture, we'd have to walk through exactly, maybe with this person to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, the thing I was interested about as well too, and it wasn't quite clear to me either, is if these objects before deletions even start happening, like the cluster is created, the resources start getting created in AWS for networking objects like VPCs and route tables, etc. And if at that point where the cleanup operations have happened, so we haven't tried to delete any managed resources, claims, composite resources, any of that stuff at all, if there is at that point objects that exist in AWS, but Crossplane doesn't know about, like I would be really interested in that case, if objects are somehow getting created and losing bookkeeping in Crossplane. But it's not clear to me that's what I was trying to get at here, but it's not clear to me if that's the case or not here.
Yeah, that was going to be my question: is is he talking about resources that were not created by Crossplane, but were created by instantiating a VPC, and AWS does give you some resources for free off of doing that?
Yeah, that's one of the things with like I know that I think nameless route tables were mentioned here, and I was guessing that those were probably the result of the VPC creation. That being said, there was an assertion like, well, it looks like we're forgetting to say delete dependents. Well, that's not really the case, right? Because we don't want to delete the dependents here. We generally, just across the entire Crossplane ecosystem, we will never delete anything that's not under Crossplane's management, even if it was created as a side effect. And so in those cases where side effects are created, sometimes we have to do some like creative things. Like for instance, a good example is a GKE cluster, which creates a default node pool to start off, and we immediately delete that default node pool and then say like, give us the node pool to attach to it so that everything is under Crossplane's management.
And I think, I think that's a totally valid and reasonable policy that Crossplane should be sticking to, for sure. Of like, if we're not managing it, like, don't go deleting things that, you know, who knows where they came from, and it probably is going to have very significant, drastic, negative consequences if we delete something because we're not sure where it came from. That's a recipe for disaster. So I definitely agree with that. Yeah, Aaron?
I was just going to say it is also possible to construct like an arrangement of objects and get yourself stuck. I've done it using other config management tools, you know, such that you create the VPC, it comes along with the default security group, you launch an EC2 instance, and while the VPC and the EC2 instance are managed by Crossplane, you don't control any added rule to the security group, which could then block deletion of everything when you try to tear it down. And since Crossplane doesn't know that one thing is dependent on the other, you wind up in a situation where it's like the resources don't get deleted because Crossplane has no idea they exist. And I've seen that with other infrastructure management tools as well.
And, you know, something I had been thinking is that, because I'd seen this with EKS, I think, before, is that maybe, you know, a while ago, but you know, you can create one object in AWS, and other things get created as, you know, automatically on the AWS side in response to that. I did not know, like you were mentioning, Aaron and Dan, I think as well too, that could happen for VPCs. Like, you create a VPC and other networking objects get created automatically on AWS side in response to that. So that could be an interesting or a potential case of what may be going on here, is that, hey, we created something, but then there's other dependents or, you know, resultant objects that get created there that will not be managed in Crossplane at all, and we wouldn't know about it. So that's definitely something that is interesting. And like, you've seen that before with networking objects specifically?
Yeah. You know, for example, if you're using Terraform, if you change security group rules, and like Terraform was decent as long as everything was under its control of knowing what order to delete things in, but you can create an arrangement of objects where it's just it doesn't know what order it is because there's a dependency that wasn't generated by the config management tool. So, you know, just the order of deletes get out of sync, and you have no choice but to go and clean things up manually at that point. I kind of want to read through this and figure out exactly what they're creating and what they're seeing get left behind. But it might just be a case where you need to ensure that you're not just assuming default when you create any resources, but that if you have, you know, security groups that your instances are going to rely on or anything else, you create your own in Crossplane, and you ignore any of the defaults that are created when you just create a VPC.
Yeah, that does make sense. I definitely appreciate the extra context here, that of the possibility of objects being created like that by the provider, by the cloud provider, that you know, Crossplane never even knows about, which could have interesting implications on other, depending on what scenarios that happens in. So it's definitely something that's challenging to deal with, I'd say. Awesome, cool. Yeah, thanks for the time that you had looked into that as well too, Dan. I definitely appreciate that. Okay, cool. So those are, you know, some of the just interesting things happening in the community, or interesting scenarios or things we're looking at. What are there any other topics or things that folks would like to bring up? Okay. All right, then if there are no more items on the agenda that folks want to discuss, then we can go ahead and adjourn. All right, thanks everybody. Good to see everybody.